Hi, this is Doug Schneider. Welcome back to Real Hi-Fi. 2 episodes ago, I talked about speaker driver materials, zeroing in on cones and domes, what they're made of, and how that can affect the sound. This time, I want to address that topic again based on the comments people made below that video and on social media, but I want to zero in on 2 things. One thing true, one thing not. So when grouping of comments, and I want to call them a grouping because a number of people made the same or at least a similar comment centered around the idea that, yes, the speaker driver materials affect the sound, but you can't judge a speaker just by the material. And that is 100% true. And the reason it's true is because of what I said in that video. And that is the speaker driver and the material is just part of the equation. The whole system is what matters in terms of how the designer or design team implement that driver into it is a system. Now, the second grouping of comments followed a similar theme in that people were saying that because this is an entire system, a good designer or design team could basically negate the materials and make a driver with any material sound like another driver with the material depending how they implemented it into the loudspeaker system. And this is 100% false. And the reason it's false is you just can't magically iron out all driver differences with the crossover or where they're placed on the baffle or the shape of the cabinet. It just doesn't work that way. They all get put into the soup, say, and the end result comes out. And you just can't make a paper this, perform like a metal this, or a plastic this, or a carbon fiber that. It's all part of the soup. It's all part of the speaker, but you just can't, boom, negate the driver material differences. In fact, I'm going to tell you a little known secret that might affect your speakers. And that is that manufacturers often have a difficult time making 2 speakers. I'm talking 2 identical speakers, or what are supposed to be identical speakers, exactly the same. And the very best manufacturers have to go to elaborate lengths to make sure the left speaker comes off identical to the right speaker, and the speaker after that in another pair comes out the same. So why is that? Well, because small driver differences, cabinet differences, crossover differences, all the parts that go into the loudspeaker can vary, even with supposedly identical material. Sometimes the glues vary. Sometimes the thickness of a material varies. Sometimes it's things they can't even see that vary. But the point is, even with supposedly identical materials, you can have variances in the end result. Now think about that for a second. A manufacturer making a loudspeaker with supposedly identical parts and materials struggles to make each speaker identical. And they do struggle. And oftentimes with good speakers, you are paying for good quality control. That costs. They're struggling to make each speaker the same. And you're going to tell me that some designer working with wildly different materials is going to magically, like I said, make this speaker sound the same as this one when they're not even close to using the same parts and materials. You're dreaming in Technicolor, but there's a little more to that. Actually, there's probably a lot more, but I'm going to keep to the little more. Saying that you can just iron out these differences in materials between the drivers to make them behave the same means working on a different part of the loudspeaker, usually the crossover, and muscling those drivers to be identical. And I have an interesting story about muscling drivers. So what happened was we were years ago measuring a loudspeaker that had good general performance characteristics, including very flat frequency response, but very high distortion. Too high, I thought, so I talked to a designer about it, a designer for another company that made its own drivers. And I said, what do you think's happening here? And he looked and he saw the drivers they were using, which came from an off-the-shelf manufacturer, but a good one. but they inherently didn't have that much distortion. He said, I think what's happening is they're muscling, that was his term, the drivers through the crossover to make them behave a certain way. And the result was much higher distortion, at least probably. It wasn't an ideal situation, but this theme has come up over the years when I talk to designers, usually ones that make their own drivers. What you want is a good driver from the start, and then you work with it in the crossover, but you don't muscle it. You don't force it to do what you want. And again, this idea that you can just take any driver and make it perform like another one just through the crossover or whatever, you're not going to come out with the same thing. And it's not going to be exactly the same because it isn't the same. Physically, probably measurably, sonically. Remember, a loudspeaker system is a system. And in a good system, all the pieces of the system have been well thought out down to the materials and then the design elements of the motor systems in the drivers and the cabinet construction. You don't try to fix one thing through another. Some do, but it's not ideal. Something's going to give. And again, this comes back to the materials used. That's part of the equation. And have I said enough about the materials? Possibly. But there was a really good comment that came out, and I'm going to address it in the next video. And that was, if you're going to worry about the materials, should they all be the same throughout? My answer might surprise you. I hope this helped. Thank you for watching.